Nice to see you all again, and the weather picking up for the next few days, thank goodness. And I've actually been out and about visiting a few members recently, which is fantastic. Actually great to see some people face to face. We'll do the usual things first. We'll start off with Don doing the usual commercials. Then he'll hand back to me to introduce our speaker for tonight. Over to you, Don.
Thank you very much, Peter. Apologies everyone for the late notice about tonight's meeting. Next week's meeting is going to be a subject very close to the speaker's heart this evening. It's going to be a presentation on cruises, and it's from the Fred Olsen group, who we have the special relationship with in 41 Club on the discount side. Rather than talking about what's happening the following week, I'd also just like to remind you that this Saturday is the 41 International AGM, which you can all join virtually. The timings and details of it all are in the email that was sent out this morning. So I hope it all makes sense to you. And I would also encourage you to fill in the questionnaires that were attached in that email, the links to the questionnaires. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Peter to introduce tonight's speaker. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, it gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, fellow 41er, member of Calpe 41. I've known Andrew for, I reckon it must be about 5 years now since I first met you, Andrew, when you appeared at my house to collect a trophy. I think it was for the best website, wasn't it, for Calpe's website a few years ago? Because Andrew's son lives in Ashby, so it was handy for him to come and pick it up here and then take it back by car rather than try and fly it over to him. And then since then, Leslie and I have had the pleasure of visiting Calpe a couple of times as vice president, and then again as president last year, which we've been hosted very nicely over there. Well recommended. It's a lovely town. Andrew worked in the international travel business for many years, followed by being 20 years chief executive of the auto clubs, coordinating the activities of clubs in 38 European countries. And now he travels the world, waffling for his supper on cruise ships. So I no doubt Andrew will cover this a bit in his talk tonight. So I'll hand over to Andrew, who's going to give us a very interesting talk tonight on cultural and the history of travel. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much indeed, Peter, and thank you for being with us tonight. Hopefully you can all now see that screen. And let me explain first of all why I chose this expression, divided by a common language, as the title. And it will become clearer as I tell you a little bit more about me, developing very slightly on what Peter has already said. That phrase, or something similar to it, is credited to lots of people: George Bernard Shaw, Oscar Wilde, but most famously, in my opinion, most famously by Winston Churchill, who said the United Kingdom and the United States are two great nations divided by a common language. And that's where I start. I will come back to Churchill because it would be remiss of me not to look at the man who is one of the greatest at the use of our language. I joined Roundtable in Chelmsford 613 in 1975. A year or two later, I moved to Lutterworth because that's where my job took me up to the Midlands, Lutterworth 613. Several years after that, I went to Wellingborough. I was the founder chairman of the 41 Club here in Calpe and had the privilege of receiving the charter from Ian Mackenzie in 2006. Peter's told you my background is international business, the travel industry, and latterly the auto clubs, and particularly coordinating or rather leading a team coordinating the activities of the European auto clubs, and we were based in Brussels. And that's where a lot of my interest comes from. In terms of my education, I graduated in business administration and economics. I am fascinated by cultural differences and the variety of language. Today, I mentor a couple of corporate chief executives, and as Peter says, when life is a bit more normal, I get the chance to travel on cruise ships with Kathy, my wife, where I travel as a guest speaker. I'm also a Lord's Taverner. and I'm a Freeman of the City of London. I am also the author of Under Latin Skies, the story of our first year involved in property here in Spain. Part of all of that makes me interested in how people present our language and some of the strange ways that they do it. For example, we spotted this sign in Ephesus in Turkey. There's a market as you leave the site on your way back to Kushadazi. And I actually said to the stallholder, why are you saying genuine fake watches? He sells fake Rolexes, fake Rados and so on. And he said, well, I've discovered that since I put that sign up, my sales are doubled because people realize they're getting a real bargain. I don't know how he makes that, but he does. And then I spotted this one. This is from Neenah, Wisconsin. Now, forgive me, but if the door didn't open, I don't think I'd be able to get in there anyway. So that one just is a weird one. And this one from Florida. There is another junction, another sign rather, that says cemetery 1 mile, landfill 2 miles. So just be aware, if your wife says to you, when you die, darling, I'm going to go the extra mile for you, you might not want her to do that. And I am originally from Chelmsford, as I said. I spotted this one on the main roads around Chelmsford. And all I can say is that secret nuclear bunker is not so secret now. So I started by talking about Winston Churchill. He had a great way with our language. He said the price of greatness is responsibility, but he was also extremely clever at his comebacks and his put downs. When he was in his wilderness years, sitting towards the back of the benches in the House of Commons, he had a couple of young Turks sitting behind him. And it is said that one of them leant across to the other and said, sotto voce, they say he's senile. To which the great man, without turning round, responded, and they say he's gone deaf as well. Churchill has topped a poll of history's funniest insults, with a famous jibe directed at either the Socialist MP Bessie Braddock or the Conservative Lady Astor, the first female MP. Depends on which version of the story you hear. But when he was accused by one of them of being disgustingly drunk, Churchill responded, and you, my dear, are ugly, but in the morning I shall be sober. The operation that I was involved in Brussels had around a dozen nationalities working there. And at least in the early days, there were constant misunderstandings. One of my colleagues, who's Derek Smith from High Wycombe, is on here tonight. And he and I and others worked really hard to find our way through those misunderstandings. And so we set up an intercultural workshop, took the team away for a couple of days in the Ardennes. And I allowed myself to be the first target, the first guinea pig. And the facilitator said, okay, working with Andrew, what do you find difficult? And I sort of strayed around the room as people were building up the confidence. And then one of them said, well, interesting. So we said, what do you mean? He said, well, we don't know what you mean. If you say something's interesting, it doesn't necessarily mean you're interested, and we don't get it. And so I explained to them that an Englishman who says, oh, that's interesting, means that's interesting. However, on the other hand, if he says, interesting, it usually means we're buying time, we're just thinking about it. The expression, with the greatest respect, doesn't actually couch any respect at all. It really means, this is the point that I intend you to hear, and I intend you to listen carefully. The expression, I would suggest, usually is an introduction to the most important point that the Englishman, the boss, wants you to hear. And so if your English boss says, I would suggest you listen very carefully, because that's what he wants you to do. And a lot of people, especially Americans, find it very hard when an Englishman says, that's not bad, assuming they mean it's quite close to being bad, whereas normally what we mean when we say that is, oh, that's quite good, I'm not unhappy with that. We are very cautious in the way we express ourselves. Not as cautious as the Japanese, I have to say, because in our dealings with them, we soon learned that most Japanese, it's getting better, but most Japanese found it almost impossible to say no in a negotiation. They would mumble a yes, or they would say, we'll come back, or they would say, yes, yes, we'll take that forward. And then they'd go away. And later you would hear some rejection come in another way. There are a lot of differences, of course, in the way that we use English and the way that our North American cousins do. For example, you know that the bonnet of a car, they would refer to as the hood. The boot of a car, they would refer to as a trunk. And that can be a little confusing. And what we call a car boot sale, they would probably call a yard sale or a garage sale or something similar. While North Americans call this a sidewalk, we call it a pavement, which itself is confusing because to them, the pavement is the surface of the road. It's the road is paved and therefore that is a pavement. It isn't only in English that we get these confusions. As you've discovered, we live in Spain and there are lots of Spanish confusions between Latino Spanish in the Americas and Castellano Spanish as it's spoken here. So for example, this is a computer, of course, and the French would call this an ordinador. The Spanish would call it una ordinadora. And both of those mean that they add up, it ordinates, it calculates things. But the Mexicans and the Latino Spanish speakers would all call it una computadora, because they get that from the American influence. They have watched and listened to all of the American TV that comes across their borders. There is another confusion. I'm sure you know that the word adios means farewell or see you again. Well, it does here, but in Cuba, for example, adios is also used to mean hello. It's a bit like that word yasu in Greece, which means hello, goodbye, cheers, how are you, I'm well. Adios in Cuba can mean not just goodbye or farewell, it can also mean hello. And you can just imagine the confusion around the negotiating table. If someone says adios and everybody else stands up to go, just as the meeting is beginning. These confusions happen in other languages as well. In Portuguese, for example, this is a cue to us, or a line. In Portuguese, it's called una bicha. In Brazil, bicha is a term for a gay. And in fact, it's quite an insulting term for a gay, a bit like a puff, for example, in our language. So a Portuguese can easily get into trouble in Brazil by using a word that they would use day to day over here without any problem. In Spain and Portugal, the word constipada means one thing, whereas in South America, it means something different. It can mean that you are constipated, just as you would expect it to, whereas over here in European Latin lands, it means that you have a bunged up nose, you've got a cold, you can't breathe properly. Well, I mean, it all means you're bunged up, but you've got to be fairly careful what you ask for in the pharmacy, because you could end up with suppositories for a bunged up nose, or first defense for the other problem. I have a friend who wears one of these regularly. He calls it a bum bag. He calls it a bum bag because it sits around his waist above his bum, that bit at the bottom of our back upon which we rest our weight when we sit down. In America, this would be called a fanny pack. It would be called a fanny pack because what we call the bum is called the fanny in America. And a bum is an American slang term for a vagrant or a street person or a beggar or whatever. But the fanny, to them, the word fanny means your backside. And I regularly have to warn Americans that we're traveling with to be very careful how they use that word around the Brits. And you will know why, because of course it means something far more intimate to our society than it does to theirs. There are lots of misunderstandings. I mean, you'll recognize a number of these. We have a friend, dear friend, who first came over to Europe probably in the 70s and was being entertained to dinner by some business colleagues, and after the meal said, could I visit the bathroom, please? Well, they lived in a beautiful Georgian house, and so they assumed that she had an interest in architecture and design. So the host took her upstairs along the corridor, opened the door, and showed her the bathroom, in which there was a beautiful bath and a wash hand basin and nothing else. She thought for a moment and said, can I see the restroom? So he said, well, yes, of course. And he took her down the stairs, took her to the room by the front door, which is the place where they rested dead bodies and was known to them as the laying out room or the restroom. And in there was a nice table, a couple of beautiful settees and other furniture. But needless to say, there was no toilet. And by this time, she was getting a little desperate. And so she steeled herself and said, I think I probably should go to the lavatory. And his response was, oh, my dear, you should have asked while we were upstairs. It's the door next to the bathroom. But it isn't only we who have to be careful. There are a number of misinterpretations that can have more serious consequences. This is the Toyota MR2. You'll probably recognize it. When it was launched in France, it was a disaster, and they couldn't work out why, until someone explained that MR2 in French would be pronounced MR2. Merde is a pile of poo in French. Who wants to buy a car that's called a pile of poo? Well, this is the Chevy Nova, which absolutely bombed in Mexico. Why did it bomb in Mexico? Well, you know this, I'm sure. It bombed in Mexico because no va means doesn't go. And when they launched the little Nova in the UK, they gave it a different name in the southern parts of Europe because they knew that it wouldn't work. Or this is the Pinto, which was seen to be a symbol of masculinity, a very macho car. But it failed completely in Brazil, because in Brazil, a Pinto is a nickname for a very, very, very small man's manhood. And that doesn't do a good thing to sell a macho car. There are other companies who've learned from their errors as well. Coors Light had the slogan, turn it loose. And that was a bit of a problem here in Spain, because, and in Mexico as well, because when it was translated, the potential market read it as, drink this and you'll suffer from diarrhea. So Coors rebranded it with the slogan, won't slow you down, which they said better resonated with the Spanish-speaking audiences. Or this one, Coke adds life. We've all seen the slogan, Coke adds life. But in Thailand, people were reading it as Coke will bring your ancestors back from the dead. And that wasn't terribly encouraging, especially because for years they'd been putting false cash into the fires that they would burn on the Day of the Dead, because they'd actually spent or invested the cash that they'd inherited. And if their ancestors came back from the dead expecting to have all the money they'd left behind, they were going to be disappointed. We also need to be a little careful how we demonstrate ourselves. You will recognize this, I'm sure, the OK sign, the symbol that Donald Trump uses all of the time. But there are places where this is downright insulting and positively rude. In Iran, this is the symbol of the devil's eye. In parts of South America, this is a sign that you are comparing someone to the most intimate part of the most filthy part of their anatomy. I wrote to Donald Trump and to his advisors and suggested that he might be encouraged to stop using this symbol. And you won't be surprised that the letter of their response never reached me. I'm not sure how that would be, but I tried. Similarly, crossing fingers. This is my wife, by the way. These hands are my wife. Crossing fingers is a sign of good luck, or let's hope so in some parts of Europe. and in the USA. But in Russia, it's a very rude way of rejecting or denying something. And in Paraguay or Uruguay, it is plain and seriously offensive, even more so than the American middle finger. Holding your palm up to someone can mean high five or praise the Lord or all sorts of other very positive things. But in Greece, this is the symbol of the mutsa. The mutsa was the path along which prisoners were taken between their holding cells and the court. And these paths were cinder paths. There would be dog mess and all sorts of things on the way. And people would attack the prisoners by grabbing a handful of whatever was there and rubbing it into their faces with their open palms. And so they would get scratched by the gravel and the cinders and messed by whatever happened to have been picked up. And this symbol in Greece is seen to be a symbol of the mutsa and is very, very insulting. You know, of course, that we signal yes by nodding and no by shaking our head. But we have to be careful because in some languages, shake, the word shake, is translated as the forward back rocking motion, what we would call a nod. Albanians and Bulgarians nod to say no, shake to say yes. And on the Indian subcontinent, you know that wobbly shaking thing that they do with their heads, which means affirmation, while a nod means no. And in Turkey, people toss their head back and raise their eyebrows to say no. Greeks and many Arabs do something very similar, often with a click of the tongue, a bit like South African Xhosa, the Xhosa language with the click of the tongue. And just to confuse things even further, in some cultures, nay means yes and okay means no. I hope you're still with me. This could be getting a little confusing. There are lots of superstitions, and these vary by cultural experience. And most of us understand the principle of Friday the 13th, and a lot of people will avoid Friday the 13th for superstitious reasons. Researchers found that half the population of the UK describe themselves as superstitious. 1 in 6 adults believe Friday the 13th poses the greatest risk of bad luck and consider it unluckier than black cats or broken mirrors or spilled salt. Examination boards have even been known to avoid exams on Friday the 13th, leaving the exam halls empty. The study also found that 4 in 5 Brits believe that they've fallen foul of a bad omen at one time or another in their lives, with 42% shattering a mirror, 2 in 5 having had a black cat cross their path, and believing that those 2 incidents were the cause of future bad fortune. Almost a third believe they've brought bad luck upon themselves by opening an umbrella indoors, and 39% have risked walking under a ladder, many of them then regretting doing so. 2 in 5 British diners, when they spill salt, will immediately grab it and throw a pinch over their left shoulder to negate the effects. To ward off bad luck, 57% have knocked on wood. 1 in 6 have carried a lucky 4-leaf clover with them. 1 in 8 Brits have a lucky item of clothing they wear when they need added protection from adversity. And 54% believe picking up a penny will bring them good luck for the rest of that day. Rather than gradually being disproved over time, our faith in superstitious beliefs is stronger than ever. You know, when we marry in England, most brides must wear something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. There used to be a final line to that poem, which said, and a sixpence in her shoe. Why? Well, the old item provided protection for the baby to come. The item borrowed from another happy bride brought luck and happiness from that person. The color blue was a sign of fidelity. The sixpence was a symbol of prosperity, or in some superstitions, it acted as a ward against evildoers, evil done by a frustrated suitor, for example. But superstitions can be identical and completely opposite at the same time. If we take the horseshoe, for example, my understanding of the fortune of a horseshoe is that if you have a horseshoe, you fix it to the wall or a door with the tines pointing upwards so that good luck can't fall through. In the Netherlands, you hang it upside down, or to me upside down, with the tines hanging down and the gap there so that the good luck can't fly away. In some cultures, it doesn't matter which way you fix it, as long as it was either stolen or in others found. It wouldn't do to put a new horseshoe up. Black cats, I referred to black cats just now. There are differences of superstitions. Sometimes other black animals, sometimes even white cats, were suspected of being the familiars of witches. And some people believe that if you have a black cat cross your path, it brings good fortune. Whereas others believe if you have a black cat cross your path, it will bring bad luck. They were believed to be shapeshifters, that witches could transform into them and could travel about doing evil things unnoticed. You can sort of almost understand why the black witch moth is thought to bring demise and ill fortune. Some citizens of the Caribbean, Central South America, believe nothing bad will come if you encounter, nothing but bad will come if you encounter this insect. In Jamaica, it's called the duppy bat, which is believed to be a lost soul with bad luck, a lost soul seeking its home, seeking its course. In Mexico, if the moth flies into a home, it's believed that someone in that household is sick, or more likely, close to death. And of course, voodoo is responsible for a whole series of different superstitions. One African tradition is that during a baby's first year of life, you shouldn't cut their hair. But there are conflicting beliefs in this notion. Some Africans cut the newborn baby's hair as soon as it starts to grow. And then, like mothers will do all over the world, they will sentimentally keep a lock of their baby's hair. And talking of baby traditions, in Scotland, several other cultures, they practice hand selling. It's considered lucky to place silver, often a coin, in a newborn baby's hand. Now, this would supposedly bring them great wealth in later life. In modern times, silver spoons and other items are sometimes gifted at christenings and baptisms. There are also a number of superstitions associated not just with rites of passage, but with times of the year. We have a number of Scots on here tonight, and that's nice to see. In the new year, or Hogmanay as it's called in Scotland, people will first foot one another, which means to be the first to enter into somebody else's home. Traditionally, the first footer should be tall, dark-haired, usually male, who comes bearing gifts of coal, a silver coin, a black bun, get that one right, salt and whiskey, symbolizing good fortune for the coming year. This most likely became a tradition established because of the invasion of fair-haired Vikings in the 8th century. And talking of fair-haired Vikings, in Denmark, broken dishes are collected and saved year-round to be thrown at the houses of friends and family on New Year's Eve. The bigger the pile of porcelain, the more good fortune the recipients are expected to have in the new year. And in China, it's bad luck to sweep the streets at New Year, Chinese New Year, because if you do, you'll sweep all the good luck out of the front door. Here in Spain, it is traditional at New Year to wear something red. And over the years, we've been to a number of New Year's events, parties, dinners, and various other things. And the Spanish certainly know how to celebrate, they know how to party. But they will always be expected to wear something red, but not necessarily on display. So if you see someone dressed in green, black, blue, or whatever, you can be pretty sure that they're wearing something red underneath. And as a lot of the people we've celebrated New Year with have been the parents and grandparents of our friends, I have to avoid imagining too much how they might look in that red underwear underneath. Saying thank you can be a little difficult if you are being hosted by someone. It can be quite dangerous. For example, you want to be sensitive to the cultural views, the religious views of your host. In India, you all know the cow is sacred, of course. So gifts of cowhide rugs or boots or belts would be likely to cause serious offence. Now, here in Spain, the leather industry is big and a lot of gifts are made of leather, purses and wallets and belts and various things. So we have to remind ourselves not to take something like that if we're going to visit in India or somewhere similar. Meanwhile, of course, alcohol is clearly unacceptable in a number of places, including in Muslim countries. So generally speaking, we found that the safest way to find the right present might be to buy it locally with some advice from a good retailer and to get it gift wrapped in the store. Another couple of examples. Giving any sort of knife, even a letter opener in China or large parts of South America, would symbolize that you are terminating, you're cutting off your friendship. In many places, if you were to give someone a knife, they would insist on paying you a coin immediately, because that way they have chosen to buy this knife. It is not you giving it to them. In Egypt, it's considered frightfully bad luck to open and close scissors without cutting anything. And again, the Chinese believe that sharp objects are harbingers of bad luck. Their sharp points can cut out your good luck. So they must be packed away, and they should always be closed, never left open. You should avoid the hairdressers at New Year, or you'll have all of your good luck chopped off in China. Of course, when we think of Chinese tradition, certain numbers are believed by some to be inauspicious or fortunate, based on the Chinese word that the number sounds similar to. The numbers 6, 8, and 9 are generally considered to be fortunate, while 4 and 7 are considered to be inauspicious. And hence, you won't find those buttons on the lift pads in tall blocks and Chinese buildings. Handkerchiefs in Brazil, Peru, or Argentina can be taken as a symbol of grief, excuse me a minute. A symbol of grief or of impending grief. So if you were to give someone monogrammed handkerchiefs, they would believe that you thought they were about to die. And that's not a good position to put yourself into. There are a lot of other things that vary. And one of the things that confused me when I was a young traveler going around the world was that restaurants set their opening hours very differently. People eat at different times. Our office in Madrid, for example, most people will be having lunch at about 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Whereas at our office in Florida, lunch is served from 11 in the morning and people will have their evening meal at 5:30, probably tuck themselves up in bed around 9 o'clock, which is when our Spanish friends and colleagues are just heading out to the restaurant, probably to sit down at about 10 in the evening. Ordering food can be tricky. I mean, you know that what we call chips are known by others as fries. You know that the Americans call them French fries, which is actually a bit of a misnomer because it's believed that they were originally discovered by airmen landing in Belgium, and they just assumed that they were in France, which incidentally brings me briefly back to Winston Churchill, because he said many, many years ago that Belgium was created to annoy the French. And Derek might agree with me, I can say it's still working. They're still very annoyed by it all. And these two are both images of tortillas, but the one on my left is the Mexican one and is a flour tortilla, quite different from the Spanish one, which is a potato omelette, the one on the right. They're both cooked in a similar pan, but they are completely different products and have completely different purposes. And then comes the whole dilemma of how much to tip. Our American friends and colleagues will routinely shell out 25, sometimes 30% as a tip. because they know that the waiting staff get paid next to nothing, and the only way they make any money is on tips. In Belgium, it was traditional not to leave a tip. When VAT was introduced into Europe, the Belgian government insisted that prices were rounded to accommodate that, and that from that point on, people should not be expected to leave a tip. It gets very difficult if you go down to the Grand Place in Brussels, which has lots of Americans there, because they have sort of corrupted the local staff. And the staff at our favorite bars and restaurants there were used to getting a 20% tip from the Americans, but they knew that they wouldn't get that from the locals. Similarly, here in Spain, it's not normal to leave much of a tip. If your bill comes to €49.50, you give them 50 and just round it up. But in the big tourist traps where the Northern Europeans, especially the British, I have to say, and the Americans turn up, so Barcelona and Madrid and Malaga, they are expecting increasingly to receive a tip. I once was with someone and I explained this to him, an American, I explained this to him. And as we were leaving the restaurant, he hung back and left a €50 note on the dining table. Behind me, I didn't see it happen. And the waiter, or rather the head waiter, came chasing after me and said, Senor Johnson, Senor Johnson. And he handed me this note and said, your friend, he dropped this on the table. And so my friend said, no, no, that's a tip, that's for you. And the head waiter said, sir, with great respect, I do not need your charity. It can be very confusing and a little bit of a nightmare. It's worth checking up before you travel somewhere. I'm coming to the end of my time, but I've got a couple of signs that I saw. I didn't unfortunately photograph either of them, but this is from a menu in Cyprus, in Limassol. And at the bottom of the menu, meaning for you to say, try this because we know you'll have happy memories of it. I read it as, try it and try to forget it. And then this one on a Yangtze riverboat, their do not disturb sign simply says, don't bother. I mentioned at the beginning that my book, Under Latin Skies, is out there. It's on amazon.co.uk. It's available as a Kindle book, Kindle for download, or as a paper copy. If anyone buys that in the next 3 weeks, anyone buys it from amazon.co.uk in the next 3 weeks, all of the royalties will go to President Peter's Dementia UK charity. So even if you don't want one yourself, persuade a few other people to buy it. And anyone who buys from amazon.co.uk in the next 3 weeks, the royalties will go to Dementia UK. And it's called Under Latin Skies, and my author name is Andrew D. Johnson. Gentlemen, ladies, I thank you very much for your attention. You've been a remarkably quiet crowd. This muting has an interesting effect because I've no idea whether you're still there or not. So I shall now stop my share and we'll find out.
We're here. We're here.
Good.
A lot of us here.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Andrew. I now call on Roger, who will give a vote of thanks, please. Unless do you want to take some questions, Andrew?
I'm happy to take them, yeah.
Yeah. Or either that or people's experiences that
Sure.
they've had same. Okay, so we'll open it up to the floor for a few minutes.
But I got a question, Andrew. The Chinese, as you said, are very high on sort of traditions and sort of superstitions. Do you know why the red and gold is such an important colours to them?
I did, but I can't remember. Remind me.
I don't.
Might as well be honest.
Ask you. I don't know.
Oh, I see. I do know. I'll have to check. I'll let you know, Peter.
Okay.
It's the Peter. It's the words. When you say those words of red and gold in Chinese, they are the pronunciation is similar to wealth. And that's how they, and it's very similar also to the number 8.
Okay. I just see, Peter. Peter, you said you raised a few eyebrows in Boston many years ago when you mentioned that you'd had peas pudding and faggot.
Yes.
And you were asked what a faggot was in England. Well, yeah, it doesn't mean the same there by any means. It's it's a homosexual act. I have a colleague, guy called Commodore Wallace, he and Lord Digby Jones and I were speaking on a cruise at the beginning of last year before everything went wrong. And Rupert said that he'd been jotting down a few notes, and he said, so I just scribbled them down on the back of a fag packet. And someone in the audience said, I'm sorry, you cannot say that. And he said, okay, I realize what I've done, because a fag is also an abusive term for a homosexual. And the next day he came in and he bought from somebody a cigarette packet and said, in Britain, we call this a fag packet. And it can get so dangerous. It's so difficult to get it wrong.
I just like the clarification when they said, what is a faggot in the UK? I would say it's like a spicy meatball. And she said, oh yeah, it's the same here as well.
Yeah.
Andrew, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, Pat from.
Hi, Pat.
Okay, hi, love. Well, as you know, I'm married to an American, and when I first went over, it's the South, Florida, and of course they have biscuits and gravy.
Yes. And a biscuit. Tell us, Tom, what a biscuit is that goes with the gravy.
Right.
Yeah, the biscuits. Right. Well, the biscuits are like a floury scone, and the gravy is sort of pale cream. So biscuits, don't ask for a biscuit in America. And also the first time I ever went in the airport, a meal, and it was chicken with chips. And I thought, oh, this is just what I need. And of course it was crisps.
Yes, yeah.
Say you have to be careful. Yeah.
You sometimes get Doritos or something like that, nachos rather.
That's what I mean. I was really disappointed anyway. Yeah. Anyway, it's nice to, even though we're in the same town.
Yes. We are starting to be able to catch up again, which is good. So.
Yeah, okay.
Just said we were at an Airbnb in Seattle being hosted by a gay couple. They went out for a cigarette and my wife came up with the phrase, I'd love to bam a fag. Oh dear, I'd love to bam a fag. Thankfully, she knew what it meant and didn't say it.
Yes.
Andrew, it's Dave Campbell here. Good evening.
Hi, Dave.
Hi there. A couple of points of interest. We live in a place called Westerham in Kent, and
yes.
Churchill's home is literally 2 or 3 miles from where we are. And another fact about Churchill, I don't know if you read, but one of his cigar butts, which was picked up, sold for a fantastic amount of money recently.
I wonder how they proved it was his.
Indeed, I wondered that as well, but it was a horrendous amount of money. They thought it might get about 800, and I think it got quite a few thousand.
Isn't it amazing?
I think it was over £4,000, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, that's right, Pete. Yeah. But,
isn't it amazing?
But it's a very popular tourist area around here, and we often take our friends and guests to Chartwell, to his ancestral home.
Yep. Yeah, that's beautiful, isn't it?
Lovely. Thank you, Andrew.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
We've got
Andrew.
Right.
Okay, Andrew, when you were talking about superstitions, I used to commute to Germany a lot. I can never find out why Lufthansa don't have a Mo 17. Have you got any idea?
No, I didn't know that they didn't. Isn't that interesting? And I've flown them often enough. Isn't that? Well, I can only assume it's a 13 type thing.
But they don't have a 13 either, but that's quite common on planes. But
no, but I mean that's understandable because they're trading with an international market.
Andrew Hornby's got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I work globally in my role at the moment, and I've had to learn a lot of things. I had a head start a few years ago because our business was bought by a Dutch company, which explained the first thing we had was an explanation of the how the British contextualize things, whereas a lot of Northern Europeans are much more direct. Anyway, the thing I was actually going to ask about was the word fine in the UK, because you mentioned some quite potentially dangerous encounters by saying the wrong thing. Saying fine in my house is really dangerous, whether it's commenting on a meal or a dress, or how you're feeling. Fine isn't a word to use.
Well, I mean, we all understand that's fine means that's good, but there are a lot of people, it's a bit like that's not bad. They would see that as, you know, you're saying it's only mediocre, but surely it's better than mediocre.
Yeah, don't come here and say it. That's all I'll say.
I'll try and remember that next time I'm there.
Andrew.
Okay, Peter's come up with the answer on number 17. It's considered unlucky in some countries, including Italy and Brazil, due to its meaning in Roman numerals. Rearrange the numbers X, V, I gives Dixie, which in Latin can be translated as my life is over. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Peter.
You're very welcome.
I
This
think
is
Ace
national,
Ace
doesn't
has
give
got
you
his hand
answers.
up as well.
Ace has got his hand up, yeah.
Yeah, Esa from Ripple and Loon Active here, Sunny Morecambe. Excellent presentation, Andrew. Thank you very
Oh, thank
much.
you very much. Thank you.
Being an avid cruiser myself, preferring a Royal Caribbean because I
Sure.
like the
What do you mean?
big boats.
You never leave the casino.
Well, big boats, they have big casinos. I prefer the boats with 5,000 people and more.
Yeah.
Question is, have you managed to make a presentations or speeches in Royal Caribbean?
Yes,
And
I have.
what was your favorite boat of the fleet?
Favorites are the dual boats. That class I really like very much indeed. We've been on Explorer and Voyager, and for a family, that would be absolutely fantastic because there's something for everyone all of the time. But we particularly liked the dual class. They're 2,000 passengers, I think, and
Okay.
just a little bit more intimate.
Yeah, sure.
But we've had some good experiences. We've been to nice places. We've been with nice people, and that's what counts really.
Well, beauty with the smaller, slightly smaller boat is that it can get into a more variety of different ports if
That's
you
true.
want to explore as well, because the big ones can only dock into the bigger Mediterranean ports and Caribbean, etc. But
Yeah,
obviously,
sure.
bigger the boat, more functions and facilities. And if you like poker, like me, there's more punters around, want to leave their donation on a poker table.
Yes, donations are always gratefully accepted. But I mean,
Thank
Fred
you.
Olsen, who are coming to talk to us next week, their ships are a little bit smaller and they have some
Sure.
slightly more unusual itineraries as a result. They can get into some of the places that those really big ones can't.
Indeed, yeah.
But it's what works for you.
Of course. But cruising is beautiful. It's great. Coming from Finland, where we have 177,778 lakes, I'm used to travel on water.
I'm sure.
Thank you.
That's good fun. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got Keith next.
Keith Howard. Hi, Keith.
Hi there, Keith.
Keith, you're muted. Keith, you have
Keith,
to unmute
Keith,
first.
you're on mute.
I switched it off.
That's better.
Here we go.
That's
I
it.
hear you now.
Can hear you
I have to
now.
say, Keith, I'm very impressed. You look very Caribbean there.
Absolutely.
Well, this is sunny Devon, of course. Yeah, this thing of English and American language. One I used to quote in my youth was that what we call the thing you correct pencil mistakes with is a rubber,
Yes.
whereas in America that is a Durex.
Yeah.
But what the Americans call Durex, we call sellotape.
Yes, that's quite.
And you can probably rub out your pencil mistakes with a Durex, but you can't limit your family with sellotape.
Wouldn't be very successful, would it? When we lived in Hampshire, we had some very dear American friends, and they went back to the States when their younger daughter was 7, I think. They'd been there for 4 years. And the mother said to us one day, I'm absolutely petrified that one day Miriam is going to put her hand up in class and ask for a new rubber because her daddy's worn theirs out.
Oh, I like it.
Gary's just said in Southwest France, caramel is French for a car crash. That's right.
Good evening, Andrew. This is David Illingworth from Cyprus.
Hi, David.
You may be interested in a Chinese number situation that I don't think you mentioned, and that is the lucky numbers. You did mention lucky numbers,
Yeah.
but I live here on a complex where we had a number 44 that the property developer wasn't selling. So he changed the number to 88 and
Right.
sold it the following week. I live at number 8, so if I ever want to sell my property, I'm going immediately to the Chinese market.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Our house is built on what was plot number 14B of our urbanization. So next door to us is plot number 13B. Our house was built 42 years ago. There is still nothing sitting on plot 13B. Well, that works for us because we have forest there, and it's beautiful. But one day someone will buy it and build on it, I'm sure.
It's incredible.
Yeah. But I won't tell them that trick. I don't want them to sell it.
No.
Andrew.
Yes.
I love the story of the chap in one of the Canadian cities who was hauled up for having parked in the wrong place. And he said, but there is a sign there. It says, fine for parking. So I parked there.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is my brother, Roger.
Hi, Roger.
Oh, thank you for having me.
He does some very good talks on detective literature and history of crime. So if, I shouldn't be promoting, he probably doesn't need any more work.
Keith, you've got your...
Just a quickie, when David Illingworth says he lives on a complex, he means complex in the same sense as Guantanamo Bay.
I thought for a moment he meant he had a complex.
Hi, David.
On the amusing menus, I'll always remember I used to do, as you know, many visits to Romania. And there was a couple of backpackers decided to stay there and open up a restaurant. They're from Australia. And the menu is fantastic, typical Aussie style. It says, the remaining taxi drivers will run them down, we'll cook them, you eat them. And then at the bottom of the menu, it said, the police here are priceless. You name the price.
Very good, very good.
It's very true as well.
Yeah, very clever.
Yeah. Have we got any more remarks or questions, guys?
I think we've covered everything.
Okay,
in the
then I'll hand over now to Roger, who will give us a vote of thanks tonight.
Yeah, thanks very much, Peter. What a great night it was. I must say it was a night of two halves. In Andrew's talk, it was all very clean and very educational. I was educated with the different meanings for words and the way they can cause embarrassment or things not to sell, and also about different traditions and superstitions. I think every phrase he had a great kernel of truth, and it was a real secret recipe, I think, there for success when you travel abroad. As I say, a real bargain bucket of information. Sadly, then the members got involved and it went downhill. And I now know my faggots from my fag packets and the price of a cigar butt in Westerham, which was not a place I thought I'd go this evening, but hey ho, there we are. But no, it was a great talk, and it's more of a reflection on myself that all I'm going to take away from it is that I should move to Belgium because there's no tipping and it will annoy the French. And also, I'll take great delight in knowing the colour of a Spaniard's underwear every New Year. So I want to thank you for that. That will keep me amused for ages. And for everybody else who doubtless has more cerebral involvement in this than me and took more away from it, I'd like you to show your appreciation to Andrew in the usual way. And Andrew, I thank you, as do everybody else. What a great talk it was. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. My pleasure.
All right, thanks very much, everyone, and hopefully see you next week.
Look forward to it.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Bye.